High above the Pacific, just off New Zealand's North Island, a plume of ash and gas spiraled into the morning sky. A stark warning from the Earth itself. Huacari, better known to many as White Island, had stirred again. The volcano, long feared and revered, was no longer silent. What began as a quiet rumble below the ocean's surface turned into a sudden eruption, casting thick ash into the atmosphere and disrupting life across the region. Domestic flights were grounded, skies turned a smoky gray, and memories of a devastating tragedy came rushing back. Air New Zealand, the country's national carrier, quickly canceled 10 flights on Thursday, with volcanic ash creeping into air routes across several key airports. Visibility dropped. Pilots were told to steer clear. The ash, invisible at first glance, was laced with fine particles capable of grounding aircraft and irritating lungs. It floated like a veil over the North Island, a reminder that the Earth below remains restless. The eruption sent shockwaves, not just through the skies but deep into the national psyche. Huacari lies 50 kilometers off the North Island's eastern coast, about 200 kilometers from Auckland, New Zealand's bustling largest city. Its rugged steaming form has long intrigued visitors, a place of mystery and danger, adventure and awe. Once a prime stop on cruise itineraries, the island drew thousands annually, all eager to witness its raw beauty up close. But that allure came at a cost. In December 2019, the volcano unleashed a violent burst of ash and steam, while dozens of tourists were on the island. There was no time to flee. The ground opened. The sky turned black. 22 people lost their lives in what would become one of New Zealand's darkest tourism tragedies. Survivors were left with lifelong injuries and trauma. Rescue teams risked their own lives to retrieve the living and the lost from a place transformed into a living hell. Since that day, Huacari has been off limits. No more tour boats, no more guided walks across its alien landscape. Just silence, caution, and the long task of healing. Now, 4 years later, that silence has been broken. Scientists had been watching closely. Earlier this month, they noticed signs: minor tremors, gas emissions, and heat rising from deep within the island's core. Satellite images confirmed it. Minor eruptive activity was underway. GNS Science, the agency tasked with monitoring New Zealand's seismic activity, raised the volcanic alert level to 3 out of 5, signaling an increase in unrest. Still, many hoped it would pass without incident, but Huacari had other plans. The eruption, while not as explosive as 2019, was powerful enough to be seen from space. A thick column of ash and sulfurous gas billowed into the sky, drifting toward the mainland. Winds carried the remnants inland, where people in coastal towns reported smelling sulfur in the air. Rotten eggs, faint but unmistakable. Some felt irritation in their eyes and throats. Most symptoms were mild, but unsettling all the same. And yet, this may be just the beginning. Government scientists have warned that the current activity could last for weeks or even months. The volcano isn't done. Pressure continues to build beneath its surface, and while no full-scale eruption is predicted, the risk remains high. No one is taking chances. Not anymore. The island's Maori name, Huacari, means to make visible or to show, and true to its name, it has reminded everyone of the power that lies beneath New Zealand's seemingly calm shores. It is a land shaped by volcanoes and earthquakes, a country always balancing on the edge of natural wonder and natural disaster. In early November 2014, 23-year-old Sylvia Rachel was living her dream. A medical student from Lublin, Poland, she had finally arrived in Seville, Spain, a place she had fantasized about for years. Spain had always fascinated her, and she had spent countless hours mastering the language, eager to use it fluently. This wasn't just another trip, it was the fulfillment of a long-held dream. Sylvia was an Erasmus student at the University of Merida, training to become a nurse. Known for her bright smile, striking blue eyes, and long black hair, it was her kindness and ambition that truly set her apart. Her dream was simple: to complete her studies and build a life in Spain, where she had fallen in love with the culture. Her friends and family knew how determined she was to make that dream a reality. Her visit to Seville, Andalusia's largest city, was part of an organized trip with the student association. She explored the historic streets, marveled at the vibrant culture, and soaked in every bit of the Spanish experience. But she didn't know that her dream trip would soon take a tragic turn. On the night of November 2nd, just after midnight, she found herself on the Puente de Triana, one of Seville's most iconic landmarks. Built in 1852, the stunning metal arch bridge offers breathtaking views of the city and attracts tourists eager to snap photos. Sylvia, like many others, wanted to capture the moment. With the lights of Seville twinkling around her, she climbed onto the metal ledge of the bridge to take a selfie. It was meant to be a simple, joyful memory. But in an instant, everything changed. She lost her balance and fell 15 feet onto a concrete footing below. Onlookers gasped in horror as she hit the ground. Bystanders immediately called for an ambulance. When paramedics arrived, they found Sylvia in cardiac arrest, her body broken by the fall. Despite their best efforts to revive her and rush her to the Hospital of Traumatology, her injuries were too severe. The bright, ambitious young woman, so full of life and dreams, did not survive. Her parents were devastated, struggling to comprehend the cruel twist of fate that took their daughter so suddenly. One moment, she had been experiencing the trip of a lifetime, and the next, she was gone. The loss left a void in the lives of those who loved her. The accident also sent shockwaves through Seville. Authorities, recognizing the dangers posed by high-traffic tourist spots, began reevaluating safety measures along the river's scenic boulevards. Sylvia's tragic fall became a sobering reminder of how fragile life can be, even in moments of joy. Her story serves as both a cautionary tale and a tribute to the adventurous spirit she embodied. Sylvia Reichel was a young woman with big dreams and a heart full of passion. Though her life was cut short, her love for Spain and life will always be remembered by those who knew her. On the night of March 11th, 1989, the streets of Matamoros, Mexico pulsed with energy. Among them was Mark James Kilroy, a senior at the University of Texas at Austin, celebrating the break with his childhood friends. They had come from different colleges: Bill Huddleston and Bradley Moore from Texas A&M, Brent Martin from Alvin Community College, but they were bound by years of friendship and the promise of an unforgettable trip. That night, as they made their way back to the U.S. border, everything seemed fine. Then Mark disappeared. It happened in an instant. The group had stopped briefly for a restroom break. Huddleston, half distracted by the night's events, noticed a man, Hispanic, a scar on his face, motioning toward Mark. He heard Mark say something like, "Didn't I just see you somewhere?" At the time, it didn't seem alarming. Maybe Mark had run into someone he met earlier that night. When Huddleston returned to the group, Mark was gone. They assumed the obvious. He had caught a ride back, met someone, or wandered off. But as the sun rose and Mark's hotel bed remained empty, panic set in. Calls to hospitals, jails, anywhere he could have ended up, nothing. The police didn't seem alarmed at first. Another drunk college kid lost in the chaos of spring break. But as the days passed and Mark remained missing, reality set in. Something was wrong. Mark's parents, James and Helen Kilroy, flew to Brownsville, Texas, launching a desperate search for their son. They flooded the city with over 20,000 flyers, pleading for information. A $15,500 reward was offered, but no real leads emerged. On March 26th, America's Most Wanted aired his case, pushing his story into the national spotlight. Still, silence. He had vanished without a trace. Then, something cracked. In early April, a small-time drug smuggler, Elio Hernandez Rivera, was stopped at a police roadblock in Matamoros. A routine arrest for marijuana possession, nothing unusual. But under questioning, he spoke of something far more sinister. He mentioned a place, the Santa Elena Ranch. The police, desperate for any break in Mark's case, decided to investigate. On April 11th, Mexican federal police stormed the ranch, the dry heat suffocating as they stepped onto the cursed soil. The first thing they noticed was the smell, thick, putrid, unmistakable. A shack stood nearby, a silent witness to whatever horrors had unfolded inside. As they stepped closer, the earth beneath them told its own tale. Graves, shallow, hastily dug, scattered across the property. They started digging. Body after body surfaced, twisted and dismembered. The remarkable fates. When they showed the ranch caretaker a photograph of Mark, the man pointed to the shack. That was where they had taken him. It was not just a crime scene, it was a slaughterhouse. Mark Kilroy had suffered unimaginably. The cult that operated here believed in sacrifice, a twisted ritual meant to grant them invincibility. Their leader, Adolfo de Jesus Constanzo, had demanded the offering of an Anglo college student. Mark had been chosen at random. He had tried to escape, breaking free for a brief moment, running toward the edge of the ranch. But they had caught him, dragged him back, bound and gagged him inside that shack. They had told him he would not be harmed. 12 hours later, Constanzo took a machete and brought it down on Mark's neck. His legs were severed at the knees. His brain and spine removed, fed into the ritual cauldron like a gruesome tribute to their false gods. The discovery sent shockwaves through Mexico and the United States. The press swarmed the ranch, exposing the nightmare that had unfolded just miles from the Texas border. The killings were not isolated. The cult had been slaughtering people for months. 15 victims in total, their bodies mutilated and discarded like offerings to the abyss. Mark's parents returned home without their son, their grief now entangled with the cause. They founded an anti-drug nonprofit in his name, hoping to prevent others from falling into the same darkness. "We put our energy into the fight against drugs," James Kilroy later said. "We try to look forward, not back." But the horror wasn't over. 2 weeks after the mass grave was uncovered, the shack was burned to the ground, a wooden cross planted over the site. The search for Constanzo and his accomplice, Sarah Aldrati, intensified. On May 6th, police tracked him to an apartment in Mexico City. As officers closed in, Constanzo panicked. He began throwing money out the window, screaming, firing his gun wildly. Then, in his final act of control, he turned to his most loyal follower, Alvaro de Leon Valdez, and ordered him to do the unthinkable, kill him. When the police finally stormed the apartment, they found Constanzo and one of his men lying lifeless, executed on their own command. Nearby, black candles flickered, their wax dripping over eerie relics, swords, a blindfolded doll, the remnants of his sick devotion. The mastermind was dead, but his cult lived on. Sarah Aldrate and the remaining members were captured, charged with murder and other heinous crimes. And yet, there was no justice that could undo what had been done. No law that could erase the terror that had lurked just beyond the border, hidden in the shadows of the party streets where Mark had once laughed with his friends. In the quiet heart of the Swiss Alps, near the village of Saxeten, a scenic canyon carved by time became the stage for one of the darkest moments in the history of adventure tourism. On July 27, 1999, what began as a thrilling escapade turned into a nightmare that would haunt survivors and echo in the memories of families across continents. That day, a group of tourists from around the world, Australia, South Africa, New Zealand, the UK, and Switzerland, gathered with anticipation. They were promised an unforgettable canyoning experience in the majestic Saxeten Gorge. As they suited up and entered the narrow canyon, excitement buzzed through the group. Few could have imagined that the beauty surrounding them would soon become deadly. Dark clouds rolled overhead, unnoticed or ignored. The guides, experienced and confident, reassured the group that the weather posed no threat. There were exits along the gorge, they said, and the adventure was safe. With those words, the descent began, jumping into pools of clear water, sliding down rock faces and floating through a paradise carved in stone. But nature had other plans. As the group ventured deeper, the atmosphere began to shift. A light rain turned into a downpour, and the once crystal waters transformed into a churning, muddy torrent. The current grew stronger. Water levels rose with frightening speed, creeping from ankles to knees in moments. The serenity of the canyon twisted into a sense of dread. Suddenly, a wall of water, silent until it struck, rushed through the gorge. A flash flood, born of the mountain's fury, smashed into the group without mercy. In an instant, joy turned into panic, and the fight for survival began. Some were swept away immediately, their bodies tossed like leaves in a storm. Others clung to rocks, gasping for air between waves. A few tried to help one another, but the force of the water was relentless. Logs and stones surged through the torrent, striking anything in their path. One survivor, a young Australian, found herself tumbling through the gorge, helpless against the fury of the flood. Thrown into a boulder, slammed by debris, she was battered and broken, but alive. Around her, the water carried the lifeless forms of friends and strangers alike. Escape seemed impossible. Every direction held danger. In that moment of chaos, a split-second decision had to be made. Stay and be crushed, or surrender to the current and hope it would spare her. She chose to let go. The river dragged her through narrow crevices and over hidden drops, tossing her like a rag doll. At one point, she was flung into the air and sent over a massive waterfall. Below, by sheer luck, a calm pool awaited. Exhausted, injured, and barely conscious, she crawled to the edge, her limbs failing her, her mind frayed by fear. The grass at the bank slipped through her fingers. Every motion was a struggle between life and death. Then, as if fate offered one final hand, another survivor appeared. Together, they reached the safety of the shore, aided by the very guide who had tried to save her earlier, just moments before the flood claimed so many. In total, 21 lives were lost that day, including 3 guides. 2 were never found. The aftermath sent shockwaves around the world. Families from distant countries flew to Switzerland for answers. A criminal investigation followed, exposing that the trip had gone ahead despite clear warnings of poor weather. 8 people associated with the tour operator were eventually found guilty of manslaughter through negligence. The scars ran deeper than any legal outcome could heal. For the Australian survivor, the flood changed everything. Physical injuries healed slowly, but the psychological toll lingered. Diagnosed with PTSD and struggling with survivor's guilt, she spent years confronting the trauma, haunted by the faces of those she'd lost. The sound of rushing water echoing in her mind long after the canyon had fallen silent. In April 2019, Patrick Maguire, his wife Anna, and 2 close friends set off on a short but exciting trip to Scotland. The couple, Americans from Wisconsin, had long dreamed of exploring the country's rich history and stunning landscapes. Patrick, a 67-year-old university professor, was a man of wisdom, wit, and an enduring love for literature. Over the years, he had inspired countless students to appreciate the written word, leaving an indelible mark on the academic community. This trip was not just a vacation, it was an opportunity to create cherished memories in a land filled with literary tradition. Patrick was known for his love of engaging conversations, but he also had a deep appreciation for quiet moments. He found solace in simple pleasures, watching the stars, enjoying a cigarette, and taking in the world around him. On the evening of April 13th, at around 10:30 p.m., he decided to step outside alone, camera in hand, to capture the beauty of the Scottish Highlands. He and his group were staying at the Glengarry Castle Hotel, a charming Victorian-era establishment overlooking the picturesque Loch Oish. The setting was perfect for a peaceful night under the vast Highland sky. Outside the hotel, 2 Victorian cast-iron benches sat on the grass near the walls. Heavy and seemingly sturdy, they had been in place for decades. What Patrick didn't know, however, was that 2 years prior, hotel management had embedded wooden blocks beneath them to prevent them from sinking into the grass. As Patrick sat down, he instinctively leaned back, expecting the solid support of the bench. But, in a cruel twist of fate, the entire structure tipped backward. Before he could react, Patrick fell, his head striking the hard wall behind him. The weight of the 158-pound, 72 kilograms, cast-iron bench pinned him down, rendering him unable to free himself. Trapped in an unnatural position, his head pressed against the wall, His neck bent forward and his chin resting on his chest, Patrick lay there unnoticed for nearly 2 hours. Inside the hotel, Anna was getting ready for bed when she realized something was wrong. Patrick hadn't returned. She called his phone, but there was no answer. Worried, she set out to search the hotel grounds. That's when she stumbled upon a heartbreaking sight. Her husband was slumped against the wall, unresponsive. Frantic, she called emergency services, but it was too late. Patrick McGuire had passed away, the victim of an almost inconceivably tragic accident. Investigators later determined that a 2017 safety audit had not identified the benches as a potential hazard. A separate inspection by a health and safety executive (HSE) official concluded that the benches were structurally sound, but should have been placed on a hard surface rather than grass. The hotel owners were initially fined £21,000, though the amount was later reduced to £14,000 after they promptly accepted responsibility for the incident. The 2 cast-iron benches, which had been in use for 60 years, were permanently removed and replaced with wooden alternatives to prevent any future accidents. Sheriff Gary Aitken, who presided over the case, summed up the tragedy with poignant words. "No one goes on holiday expecting not to return, and one would assume there are few activities with lower risk than sitting outside a Highland hotel to smoke a cigarette and enjoy the evening." Indeed, Patrick McGuire's untimely passing serves as a sobering reminder of life's unpredictability. What should have been a quiet, reflective moment under the Scottish night sky instead turned into an unthinkable disaster, leaving his loved ones grappling with the loss of a man whose intellect, kindness, and passion for literature had touched so many lives. In 2017, 22-year-old Jesse Clint Galganov had the world at his feet. A brilliant student, he had just graduated from Wesleyan University in Connecticut with a perfect 4.0 GPA. He was set to attend medical school but decided to take an 8-month adventure through South America and Asia before committing to his studies. His journey began on September 24th, when he flew from Montreal to Lima, Peru. After spending a few days exploring the city and staying at the Loki hostel, Jesse boarded an 8-hour overnight bus to Huaraz, arriving on September 28th. He checked into a backpacker hostel and spent the day preparing for a 4-day trek along the Santa Cruz Trail. Before setting off, he informed his mother that he might be out of contact for a few days. On September 30th, Jesse began his hike as planned. By the evening, he had reached the Tuctupampa camp, where he shared a campsite with 2 French hikers. They later described his behavior as concerning. He seemed disoriented, complained of headaches and diarrhea, and mentioned getting lost. However, by the next morning, Jesse appeared to be in better spirits, and they all had breakfast together before he continued on his journey. The last confirmed sighting of Jesse was on October 1st, when he met a Czech hiking group near the Punta Union Pass and asked them for water. After that, he disappeared without a trace. At first, his mother wasn't alarmed when he failed to check in after his 4-day hike. She assumed he might have extended his trek. But as days passed with no word, her worry turned to panic. Desperate for information, she reached out to his friends on Facebook. Only one responded, saying they had last spoken to Jesse on September 29th. With growing fear, Jesse's mother filed a missing persons report on October 14th. She contacted embassies in Peru, the US, and Canada, hoping for assistance. But the investigation hit roadblocks. The owner of the hostel where Jesse had supposedly stayed denied he had ever checked in. Local muleteers, who frequently traveled the trails, refused to speak to authorities, fearing they would be blamed for his disappearance. Determined to find their son, Jesse's parents took matters into their own hands. They flew to Peru, walked the trail where he was last seen, and hired a private Israeli search and rescue team. They spent over $1 million on the search, raising funds through donations and a GoFundMe campaign. To encourage leads, Jesse's parents offered increasing cash rewards. First $10,000, then $30,000, and eventually a staggering $500,000, but no solid information ever emerged. Several theories surfaced. His parents suspected he had been kidnapped for forced labor by a cartel, which fueled their belief that offering money might lead to answers. Others speculated that he had fallen victim to acute altitude sickness, wandered off, and perished in the wilderness. But without any evidence, both theories remained unproven. In honor of their son, Jesse's father launched JesseProtected.com, a website dedicated to raising awareness about missing persons and providing resources for families facing similar tragedies. To this day, Jesse Galganov's fate remains a chilling mystery, leaving his loved ones searching for answers that may never come. On July 18, 2016, 17-year-old Mike Mansholt set off on what was supposed to be the adventure of a lifetime, his first solo trip abroad. A seasoned explorer, Mike had already braved the wilds of Canada with his father. But this time, there were no parents, no guides, just Mike, a rented bike, and Malta. It was supposed to be thrilling. Instead, it turned into a nightmare. His girlfriend was in Malta for a language course, so they spent a few days together before she flew back to Germany. But Mike wasn't ready to leave. With his gray backpack, a few €100, a straw hat for the sun, and his GoPro to capture it all, he pedaled off into the unknown. His last message to his father was casual, a voice note about steep roads and a promise to send a picture soon. That picture never came. By July 19th, Mike had failed to return his bike. By July 22nd, he missed his flight home. Alarm bells rang, and his family launched a search. 8 days later, on July 26th, Mike's body was discovered at the base of the Dingley Cliffs, a 29-meter drop. His bike dangled in a bush above, his shoes and sunglasses scattered. But something was off. His backpack, GoPro, and other belongings had vanished. Authorities quickly ruled his death an accident. Case closed. But for Mike's father, Bernd Mansholt, something didn't add up. At the site, a doctor informed him that Mike's back had been broken in 2 places. That relief, however, was short-lived. At the morgue, a staff member pulled him aside with shocking news. There were no fractures at all. Stranger still, the rented bike had barely a scratch. If Mike had truly fallen, how was the bike practically intact? And when Bernd asked about his son's missing belongings, authorities handed him an old Canon camera, trying to pass it off as Mike's GoPro. It wasn't. When he pointed this out, they had no explanation. Things got weirder when Mike's body was returned to Germany. A second autopsy revealed a gruesome discovery. Most of Mike's organs were missing. His heart, lungs, liver, pancreas, and brain had all vanished. What remained? His left kidney, diaphragm, spleen, and large intestine. His body weighed just 32 kilograms, 70 pounds. Even more unsettling, despite Maltese law requiring embalming before transporting a body, Mike's body had not been embalmed at all. Maltese forensic specialist Mario Sherry claimed rodents had eaten the missing organs. German specialists disagreed. If animals were responsible, there would have been bite marks, and liquefied brain matter would have left traces. There were none. The German team couldn't rule out suffocation or internal bleeding due to the body's condition, but the lack of external injuries raised doubts. Bernd pressed for answers, but Maltese authorities were dismissive. They shrugged off Mike's missing belongings, suggesting a tourist had stolen them. It wasn't until April 2018, nearly 2 years later, that Bernd was granted full access to the case file. The official conclusion? Mike likely died from a fall. However, German prosecutors theorized that trees might have broken his fall, explaining the lack of severe injuries. Yet, this contradicted the Maltese explanation regarding the missing organs, as the German side insisted they were intact when his body was first found. Determined to uncover the truth, Bernd has returned to Malta time and time again, battling bureaucracy, contradictions, and eerie silence. In 2021, he took legal action to obtain a European investigation order, hoping for real answers. To this day, the circumstances of Mike Mansholt's death remain a chilling mystery. In the harsh summer of 1993, the remote Khamar Daban mountain range in eastern Siberia became the backdrop for one of the most chilling and baffling hiking disasters in recent memory. Echoing the eerie Dyatlov Pass incident of 1959, 7 hikers embarked on what was meant to be a challenging but fulfilling expedition. What happened instead remains shrouded in mystery, filled with panic, death, and unanswered questions. The group was led by Lyudmila Korovina, a 41-year-old survivalist renowned for her skill, discipline, and deep connection to the Siberian wilderness. Raised in a village where outdoor survival was second nature, Lyudmila had mentored dozens of young hikers. Accompanying her were 6 of her students, ranging in age from 15 to 24. Each brought their own strengths to the journey. Yulia, the youngest, dreamed of studying biology and had a childlike awe for nature. Sergei, a 17-year-old athlete, brought endurance and energy. Denis, age 19, was a quiet photographer intent on capturing the beauty around them. Valentina, or Valya, 20, was deeply bonded to Lyudmila and known for her calm. Alexei, the eldest at 24, had an engineering background and was curious about the geology of the terrain. And finally, Sasha, a charismatic 21-year-old storyteller, kept spirits high with folklore and jokes. The Khamar Daban Mountains, near the serene Lake Baikal, are a land of raw beauty and hidden danger. Rivers cutting through pine-covered cliffs, caves nestled in rock, and wildlife ranging from wolves to rare birds. It was a landscape that thrilled the adventurer but punished the unprepared. Still, with Lyudmila at the helm, the group was confident. They set out on August 2, 1993, alongside 2 other hiking groups in the area. One of these was led by Lyudmila's daughter, Natalia. The plan was for all groups to reunite by August 5th, but when Lyudmila's team failed to appear, Natalia assumed delays or a change in route. Nothing unusual. That changed on August 10th. A group of kayakers paddling along a river spotted a bloodied, disoriented young woman stumbling from the trees. It was Valya, the only survivor. Her story stunned authorities. According to Valya, their trek started well. Spirits were high, the weather was fair, and they even reached their summit ahead of schedule. But the descent brought trouble. A cold, punishing rain rolled in on August 4th, soaking gear and slowing progress. That evening, they made camp, expecting to meet Natalia's group the next day. Morning brought chaos. Sasha, who had been lagging behind, suddenly screamed and collapsed, blood pouring from his eyes and ears. As Lyudmila attempted to take control, other members began showing similar symptoms: bleeding, confusion, panic. Some ran, others dropped where they stood. Lyudmila, too, succumbed, crying out before collapsing. In the end, Valya and Denis were left with the lifeless bodies of their friends. They tried to descend the mountain together, but Denis soon died as well. Alone, Valya spent 4 harrowing days navigating the terrain, following power lines until she reached the river and salvation. Rescue helicopters launched a search. 2 weeks later, they located the rest of the group. The 2 hikers who had fled the scene were found dead from exposure. Autopsies revealed that all but Lyudmila had died from hypothermia. Lyudmila, heartbreakingly, had suffered a heart attack. Investigators were baffled. How could such a well-prepared group perish so quickly in summer conditions? Theories abounded: toxic plants or water, exposure to sudden cold winds, or even hallucinogenic mushrooms. Some suggested military tests gone wrong. Others whispered of strange atmospheric events or ancient spirits of the land. Adding to the mystery were reports of strange activity in the area over the years. Local folklore spoke of flickering lights in the sky, eerie sounds, and signs of past civilizations hidden in caves. Archaeologists had uncovered cryptic cave paintings depicting unknown symbols and figures, evidence of something forgotten by time. Despite thorough investigations, the cause of the Khamar Daban tragedy remains unsolved. In January 2024, Dakarai Earl Cobb arrived in Medellin, Colombia, looking for a place to stay while he searched for more permanent housing. He found a room in the Santa Lucia neighborhood, renting from a local family who agreed to let him stay for a month. The landlords later recalled that he mostly kept to himself and was not very social. He would greet them occasionally, but beyond that, he remained private. When his rental period ended in early February, The landlords knocked on his door to check in, but there was no response. They assumed he might have gone out and thought little of it. 2 days later, on February 5th, they returned, growing concerned after noticing that the room remained silent. Using their spare key, they let themselves in and made a grim discovery. Dakari was dead on his bed. It was clear that he had been deceased for several days. Panicked, the landlords immediately called the authorities. Investigators arrived and examined the scene before transporting Dakari's body for an autopsy. There were no signs of forced entry, no clear evidence of a struggle, and none of his belongings appeared to be stolen. Initially, some suspected that his death might have been the result of a robbery gone wrong, but after speaking with the other tenants in the building, the police ruled out theft as a motive. As the investigation unfolded, a disturbing realization emerged. Dakari was not the only one to die under strange circumstances that week. In the span of just 4 days, 3 other individuals were found dead in different locations across Medellin. 2 of them had fallen from the upper floors of their residences under unexplained conditions, while the third was found lifeless in a hotel room, with no signs of violence or struggle. The similarities between these deaths raised unsettling questions. Were these cases somehow connected? Had these people fallen victim to something more sinister? News of the mysterious deaths quickly spread, creating fear among both locals and tourists. Medellin had worked hard to improve its reputation in recent years, welcoming more visitors and promoting itself as a safe and thriving city. But with 4 unexplained deaths in such a short time, people began to worry. As safety concerns grew, tourism in the city started to decline. In response, Medellin's safety secretary, Manuel Villa, addressed the situation publicly and announced new security measures. He stated that officials would be focusing on issues like human trafficking, drug-related crimes, and organized criminal activity, which he believed could be linked to these incidents. He also warned that while the city welcomed tourists, it would not tolerate criminal behavior. "We invite visitors to enjoy Medellin's culture, food, and business opportunities," he said, "but those who engage in illegal activities will face consequences. We will not allow anyone to put public safety at risk." Despite the increased attention on the case, no suspects were ever arrested in connection to Dakari's death. Investigators were unable to determine if the 4 deaths were related or if they were simply a series of tragic coincidences. To this day, the circumstances surrounding Dakari's death remain a mystery, leaving many to wonder if the truth will ever be uncovered. In July 2017, 22-year-old Bakari Henderson was living his best life on the Greek island of Zakynthos. Fresh out of the University of Arizona with a finance and entrepreneurship degree, he was on the brink of launching his own clothing line. Before diving into business, he wanted to celebrate sun, sea, and unforgettable nights with friends. Zakynthos, famous for its stunning beaches and vibrant nightlife, seemed like the perfect place. Bakari and his friends spent their days cliff diving in secret spots, laughing and soaking up the carefree atmosphere. He was the heart of the group, the kind of guy who always had your back and brought positive energy wherever he went. The trip was shaping up to be a dream vacation. For Bakari, traveling felt freeing. As a young black man in America, he knew certain unspoken rules, but overseas, those rules seemed to loosen, making the world feel a little kinder. That night, after a day of adventure, he and his friends headed to Laganas, the island's wildest party district, ready to celebrate. A Serbian waitress invited them into a club. Drinks flowed, music thumped, and the night was young. At around 3 a.m., Bakari took a selfie with the waitress. A simple, harmless moment. But one man in the bar saw it differently. A Serbian man, seething with anger, demanded to know why she was talking to a black man. His hostility escalated quickly. He threw a punch. Bakari, taken off guard, tried to defend himself, but he wasn't facing just one man. More men, several Serbians, a Greek, and a British citizen, joined in. The atmosphere shifted from carefree to violent in seconds. Bakari bolted out of the bar, but the mob chased him. CCTV footage captured the horrifying scene. A group of about 10 men surrounding him, mercilessly beating him, with most blows landing on his head. His friends barely had time to react before it was too late. By the time they reached him, Bakari was gone. In 2018, 9 men were identified and brought to trial, but instead of being charged with murder, 6 were found guilty of deadly assault, a much lighter charge, while 3 others walked free. For Bakari's family, the verdict was a gut punch. Justice had slipped through their fingers. A Greek prosecutor, also disturbed by the verdict, ordered a retrial, possible in Greece due to the lack of double jeopardy laws. Even Kamala Harris took notice, bringing the case to the Greek Prime Minister. However, delays kept pushing justice further out of reach. Finally, in 2022, a Greek court upheld the original convictions, but by then, 5 of the convicted men had been released, and the 6th had his sentence reduced. The outcome felt like a bitter aftertaste. Justice delayed and denied. Bakari's family fought tirelessly, hoping for real accountability, but the system failed them. Their son, full of promise, was taken in an instant, over a selfie, over a senseless act of hate. They now dedicate themselves to keeping his memory alive and pushing for a world where this never happens again. Bakari Henderson had dreams, drive, and an unshakable spirit. He should have come home with stories of sun-drenched beaches and laughter-filled nights. Instead, his story became one of tragedy, injustice, and a brutal reminder that racism knows no borders. His loved ones are left with memories and a fight for answers that should have never been necessary. As the first light of dawn kissed the ancient city of Luxor, a group of tourists gathered with excitement and awe. The promise of a sunrise flight over the Valley of the Kings and the Nile River had drawn them from across the world. Britain, France, Hungary, Japan, Belgium, and Hong Kong. From the air, the desert stretched out in golden silence. It was a vision out of a dream. But for 19 of those passengers, that morning would not bring wonder. It would bring terror and death. The hot air balloon, one of many that filled the skies that morning, lifted off smoothly at first. Suspended over ruins steeped in history, passengers leaned over the edge, taking in the serenity below. The world, for a fleeting moment, felt weightless and still. Then something went terribly wrong. As the balloon began its descent around 7 a.m., a fire broke out, sudden and unrelenting. Witnesses nearby described seeing the flames lick up from the base of the balloon, a red glow against the morning light. In the chaos, the pilot and a British passenger jumped from the basket when it was just meters from the ground, their instinct to escape overriding all else. But the balloon, now unbalanced and unstable, shot upward once more. Flames engulfed the basket, fueled by leaking gas from the onboard cylinders. In the sky above the sugarcane fields west of Luxor, people began to leap from the burning gondola, some with hope, some out of sheer desperation. The balloon continued to rise, carrying its remaining passengers higher into the air before plummeting over 1,000 feet into the field below. The explosion, when it came, was deafening. One of the remaining gas canisters ignited upon impact, sending a final blast through the quiet countryside. Charred fragments of the balloon and debris were strewn across the crash site, a stark contrast to the stillness of the ancient land surrounding it. Of the 21 people aboard, only 2 survived. The Egyptian pilot burned over most of his body, and 1 British tourist. Among the dead were couples, friends, and solo travelers, all of whom had begun their day with joy. By mid-morning, the mood in Luxor had changed. Smiles turned to silence. Grief swept through the town like a sandstorm. Consular officials arrived in Luxor swiftly, providing aid and support to the injured and grieving. The British Foreign Office confirmed the deaths of 2 British nationals and 1 British resident. Their next of kin were notified, and messages of condolence poured in from officials, family members, and travel companies. Thomas Cook, one of the operators involved, promised full support to affected families, describing the event as a terrible tragedy. Behind the scenes, Egypt's tourism industry took another hit. Already staggering from years of political unrest, the crash brought fresh fears to a sector that relied heavily on international visitors. The Civil Aviation Minister, Wael El Madawi, immediately suspended all hot air balloon operations and personally led the investigation into what became known as the deadliest ballooning disaster in history. Details began to emerge. Mohammed Youssef, a nearby pilot, recalled the horror. He had been airborne just 100 meters away, preparing to land when the fire broke out. He believed a leak in one of the 4 gas cylinders caused the initial flames. When the pilot and one tourist jumped, it caused the balloon to jerk and ascend rapidly, forcing more heat into the canopy above. At about 100 feet, Youssef saw passengers jumping. Some never reached the ground alive. Others died upon impact, and those who stayed inside perished in the inferno that followed. The crash shook Luxor to its core. It cast a long shadow over a place known for its timeless beauty and sacred past. What should have been a gentle ride through the clouds became a descent into chaos. On March 15, 2018, the Sharp family, a close-knit group from Creston, Iowa, set out for what they hoped would be a much-needed escape. Kevin Sharp, a well-respected stock car racer known as the Sharpshooter, was joined by his wife Amy, a compassionate and dedicated mother, and their 2 children, 12-year-old Sterling and 7-year-old Adriana. The family had rented a condo in Tulum, Mexico, and after a smooth journey from Iowa, they were ready for some much-needed rest and relaxation. But in just a matter of days, everything would spiral into an unimaginable tragedy. The Sharps were in high spirits when Amy texted her mother around 7 p.m. on March 14th, confirming their safe arrival. "We made it to our condo," she wrote, reassuring her family back home. The next day, everything took a turn. The family had planned to visit local attractions, take in the sights, and maybe even visit a water park. But then, around 5 p.m. on March 15th, Kevin sent a message to his friend Travis Anderson. It would be the last communication anyone would hear from the Sharps. By March 21st, the family was expected to return home, first to St. Louis, then on to Danville, Illinois for a college basketball game. But when they didn't show, the silence was deafening. The worry set in, and by the early hours of March 22nd, the Sharp family was officially reported missing. Friends and family flooded social media with appeals for help, desperate for answers. As the hours ticked by, anxiety gripped everyone who knew them. The authorities launched an investigation, and their phones were traced to Tulum, but there was no sign of movement. Then, late on March 22nd, a discovery no one could have prepared for. Employees at the condo complex began to notice a strange, foul odor coming from the Sharps unit. Concerned, they entered, and what they found stopped them cold. The Sharps were dead. Kevin, Amy, Sterling, and Adriana, all of them, but there was no sign of foul play. The Mexican authorities, alongside the U.S. State Department, confirmed the unthinkable. The cause of death was asphyxiation due to a malfunctioning water heater. A tragic accident, but a chilling one. A gas leak in a poorly maintained unit took the lives of an entire family, and it left the town of Creston reeling. Kevin, known for his racing triumphs and community involvement, would never cross the finish line again. Amy, a beacon of kindness, was gone, as were Sterling and Adriana. Their bright spirits extinguished too soon. The family's death left a gaping hole, but it also raised urgent questions about tourist safety in Mexico. Despite the deaths not being related to violent crime, the shadows of rising violence and crime rates in regions like Tulum were impossible to ignore. A U.S. State Department advisory had warned of increased crime in Quintana Roo, where Tulum is located. Yet, tragically, the Sharp family's deaths only added to the growing concern for American tourists. As the community mourned the loss, others took to social media to share their support for the grieving families. Messages flooded in, but no amount of words could fill the void left behind by the loss of a mother, father, and 2 children. The Sharp family's tragic death served as a stark reminder of the fragility of life and the unpredictability of the dangers that can lurk just out of sight. In March 2024, just before Easter, Storm Nelson wreaked havoc across parts of Spain and the UK, with southern Spain bearing the brunt of the destructive weather. Fierce gusts, torrential rain, and towering waves threatened to spoil the Easter festivities, prompting Spain's state weather agency to issue a risk alert. Despite the warnings, many travelers had already made their plans, determined to spend their holiday in Spain, hoping the storm would pass. While the storm cast a dark cloud over celebrations, the determination of both locals and travelers shone through as they braced for the challenges ahead. One such traveler was 62-year-old John, a British man visiting Spain with his partner. The couple had chosen Spain, hoping for pleasant weather during their getaway. However, the unexpected arrival of Storm Nelson disrupted their plans. On March the 27th, 2024, they traveled about 200 miles from Valencia to the charming village of San Esteban de Pravia in Muros de Nalón. They were joined by friends and planned to spend a week in this picturesque town, soaking in the scenery and unwinding. This was John's first visit to the area, and although the weather was less than ideal, they remained hopeful. After arriving, the couple checked into their rented apartment, where the landlady warned them about the approaching storm. Despite the unsettling weather forecast, John and his partner decided to make the best of their trip. The next day, March 28th, they set out to explore the village. The couple wandered the town and took photos, while their friends stayed behind. Around 1 p.m., they decided to take a walk along a breakwater, a stone structure stretching out into the sea. Unfortunately, as they reached the end of the breakwater, a rogue wave, larger than expected, struck with terrifying force. It knocked John off his feet and sent him crashing into the water. In a horrifying moment, the waves dragged him away from his wife, pulling him into the churning sea. His wife, in shock and desperation, immediately alerted the authorities. A helicopter and a team of firefighters were dispatched to search for John. Despite their best efforts, it wasn't until 2 p.m. that John's body was found in the San Esteban estuary, a short distance from the breakwater. A crane mechanism was required to retrieve his remains, using nearly 100 feet of cable to lift him to safety. The body was brought back to the breakwater, where city officials took charge of the situation. An autopsy was scheduled for the following day to determine the exact cause of death. In the wake of this tragedy, John's wife was forced to contend not only with the heartbreak of losing her husband, but also with false rumors that John had fallen while trying to take a selfie. These damaging rumors sparked unnecessary online hate and criticism. To clear her husband's name, a woman who knew John published a letter in a Spanish newspaper, confirming that John had not been attempting to take a selfie when he tragically fell. She hoped that, through this, John's death would not be in vain, and called for investment in better warning systems to prevent future tragedies in the area. John's untimely death serves as a stark reminder of the unpredictable power of nature, as well as the need for stronger safety measures for tourists who may not fully understand the dangers of such locations. The island of Koh Tao, nestled in the Gulf of Thailand, is often described as paradise, a sanctuary of turquoise waters and palm-fringed beaches. But on the morning of September 15, 2014, that serenity was shattered. Beneath the beauty, a brutal story unfolded that would draw international attention, fuel controversy, and leave two families on opposite sides of the world drowning in grief. David Miller and Hannah Witheridge had never met before arriving on Koh Tao. Fate brought them to neighboring rooms at a modest beachfront complex known as Ocean View Bungalows. Like countless young backpackers before them, they came in search of sunshine, adventure, and a break from the pressures of everyday life. It should have been a trip filled with laughter and sunsets. Instead, it ended in horror. In the early hours of that fateful day, David and Hannah were last seen walking together on the sands of Seri Beach, the island's most popular strip. They had left a nearby bar, the warm island breeze still brushing the shore as they strolled under the stars. But what followed in the darkness was an act of unspeakable violence. Their bodies were discovered the next morning, close together, yet lifeless. Hannah, just 23, had been brutally assaulted and murdered. David, 24, was found nearby, his body bearing the marks of a savage beating before he was left to drown in the shallow surf. News of the double murder sent shockwaves through the island and beyond. Two promising lives, full of ambition and kindness, had been snatched away in a moment of cruelty. Hannah was a recent graduate pursuing a career in speech and language therapy, remembered by her family as a gentle soul with the power to touch many lives. David, an engineering student from Jersey, was known for his creativity, intelligence, and warmth. Both were adored by their families and communities, and their sudden deaths created a wound that would never truly heal. The grief of their loved ones soon gave way to another exhausting ordeal, the pursuit of justice. As Thai authorities scrambled to find those responsible, pressure mounted to produce answers. Just weeks later, two young men, Burmese migrant workers named Zaw Lin and Wai Phyo, were arrested and charged with the killings. Accused of premeditated murder, rape, theft, and being in the country illegally, the men became the focus of a case that stirred as much skepticism as outrage. From the beginning, the investigation was plagued by doubts. Claims surfaced that the suspects had been beaten and coerced into confessing. Rumors of mishandled evidence and political pressure swirled, casting shadows over the entire trial. Human rights groups called out flaws in the justice process, and growing numbers began to question whether the real killers had ever been caught. Despite these concerns, both the families made the difficult journey to Thailand, seeking truth, understanding, and perhaps a measure of closure. The Witheridge family, heartbroken yet determined, sat through parts of the trial in Koh Samui. At times, the grief was too much to bear, especially when graphic images of Hannah's body were shown in court. The Millers did the same, quietly honoring their son by visiting the very beach where his life had ended. They left behind tokens of remembrance, a sunflower-covered funeral program, a tribute to the bright life David had lived. The families remained mostly silent on the controversial aspects of the trial, but in a statement released later, the Witheridge family said they were confident in the Thai police's efforts, though many still viewed the verdicts with unease. Justice, in the legal sense, had been served. Yet, for many observers, the story left behind unanswered questions and a lingering sense of injustice. Today, Koh Tao still attracts travelers from across the globe, drawn by the same allure that once brought Hannah and David there. But beneath the sunlit waves and rustling palms, the memory of that tragic night lingers like a whispered warning that even paradise holds its secrets, and sometimes the darkness comes without reason. On March 3rd, 2023, Latavia T. McGee, a 33-year-old mother of 6, traveled to Matamoros, Mexico for a tummy tuck procedure, accompanied by 3 close friends, Eric James Williams, Shahid Woodard, and Zindel Brown. The group, from South Carolina, rented a white minivan for the trip, unaware of the nightmare that awaited them. Around 11:45 a.m. on March 3rd, their routine journey took a horrific turn. Gunmen, believed to be members of the Gulf Cartel, pulled up beside them on the streets of Matamoros. Without warning, they opened fire. Brown and Woodard were struck, while McGee, desperate to protect herself, was confronted by one of the attackers. Williams, too, was shot and trying to flee. The gunman, thinking the group was involved in smuggling, seized the friends, forcing them into their vehicle. What followed was a nightmare few could endure. A bystander captured the horrific abduction on video, and it quickly spread across the internet. Woodard, gravely injured, turned to his friends and told them he loved them. As McGee held back tears, she could only apologize, knowing their fate was slipping away. The group was transported to a remote location where McGee and Williams were held captive, their friends, Brown and Woodard, dead. McGee, in her desperation, asked to see the footage of their kidnapping. A guard showed it to her, further deepening her fear that their families would never know the truth. In a twist of fate, a man who had once been their captor turned into a reluctant savior. This man, an American himself, pleaded with his superiors to release McGee and Williams. He warned them that once they were freed, he would have to flee too. Blindfolded, the 2 survivors were transported through the night, hidden under bodies to avoid detection. After hours of evading authorities, they were finally freed by Mexican authorities. acting on a tip-off. In the cold, early hours of the morning, they were found, but the joy of survival was tempered by the loss of their friends. The kidnapping, broadcasted across the world, sent shockwaves through the public. For McGee and Williams, it was a trauma they would never forget. But the nightmare didn't end with their rescue. The cartel's mistake had led to the tragic deaths of two innocent men, Shahid Woodard and Zindel Brown, and the ripple effect of their loss was felt across the globe. Authorities later discovered the cartel had mistaken the group for Haitian smugglers, a deadly error that led to devastating consequences. In response, both U.S. and Mexican authorities launched a massive investigation, while the White House condemned the violence. Calls for military intervention mounted, but the pain of the families was undeniable. Woodard's family, still reeling from his brutal death, would soon mark his 34th birthday with a heavy heart. The kidnapping also sparked wider concerns about safety in Mexico. The U.S. State Department had issued a Level 4 advisory for Tamaulipas, where Matamoros is located, citing the dangers of cartel violence, kidnappings, and murder. Yet, despite the warnings, many still traveled to Mexico for affordable medical procedures, as McGee had in years past. This time, however, tragedy struck. While McGee and Williams continued to recover from their physical and emotional wounds, the families of the two men lost in the ordeal are left with a gaping hole that can never be filled. The victims' deaths were not just another statistic in a region plagued by violence. They were people with families and futures whose lives were cruelly snatched away in an instant.